to New York, where Senator Kirsten Gillibrand will debate Republican Wendy Long. Senator Gillibrand was in the U.S. House from 2006 to 2009. She took the seat of then-Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. Ms. Long is a New York City attorney and currently a member of Governor Mitt Romney's Justice Advisory Committee. This is their only debate. It's taking place at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York, and is courtesy of New York One and YNN. This is live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Good evening. Welcome from Skidmore College's Helen Filene Ladd Concert Hall at the Arthur Zankel Music Center. I'm Errol Lewis.
And I'm Liz Benjamin. Tonight's U.S. Senate debate is being shown across the state on YNN, New York One News, New York One Noticias, as well as across the country on C-SPAN. Let us now introduce the two candidates this evening. The order in which they are standing and speaking was determined earlier today by a coin toss.
Folks, please welcome Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And please welcome Attorney Wendy Long. We're going to begin now with 1-minute opening statements. We start with Senator Gillibrand.
This election is about who we fight for. I'm fighting for the middle class, for our small businesses, for our military families, our veterans, and our seniors. I'm fighting so that every child in New York has an opportunity to reach his or her God-given potential. But as I travel around New York, the number one issue is jobs. But I know government doesn't create jobs, people do. That's why we have to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of our small businesses, giving them the tools they need, like access to loans and lower taxes. We need to reward U.S.-based companies, not those that ship our jobs overseas. I know we can see Made in America again, right here in New York. But to get this done, we need to clean up Washington, and that's why I took on my own party with automatic pay raises. It's why I've passed the Stock Act to make sure members of Congress are never above the law. We need to focus on transparency and accountability. I know we can bring people together to get it done, because in the Senate, that's what I've done.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn now to Ms. Long.
I want to thank YNN, New York One, Skidmore College, and you, Liz and Errol, for moderating this debate. I feel so lucky to have been born in the United States, a country where we're all equal in our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and a Constitution that unites us all as a people. I was so fortunate to get an outstanding public school education and to serve as the top staffer to 2 United States senators and a law clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court. I became a partner at a law firm in New York. I'm a wife and the mother of 2 school-aged children. And I know I've been through many tough times in my family and many good times too. And I understand the silence that hangs over many kitchen tables around New York as we worry what the future holds for us and our children. Our problems are clear. We're broke. We're overtaxed, overregulated, and on Senator Gillibrand's watch, we've lost jobs. We can solve these problems, not with slick talking points, but with honesty and common sense.
Okay, thank you very much for both opening statements. We're going to be starting with tonight's questions. Answers will be limited to 60 seconds. Rebuttals are going to be 45 seconds, and at the questioner's discretion, re-rebuttals will be 30 seconds. This is the first question. It is going to you, Senator Gillibrand. Quite timely at this point, the State Department has been criticized for its handling of the deadly attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. this resulted in the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens. We now know there were multiple requests for security that went unheeded. We heard the president last night take full responsibility for this incident. What could have been done better, if anything, in your opinion, to avoid this attack? What should be done going forward? And what is the role of the U.S. Senate in this whole situation?
Well, both Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has done an extraordinary job all across the world representing our values, and President Obama have taken responsibility for what happened in Libya. Obviously, my heart goes out to the families of those who were killed in that terror attack. And as President Obama explained, we will make sure we get to the bottom of what happened in Libya. We will make sure that the terrorists who attacked our men and women will be held accountable. And he will conduct a full investigation with Secretary Clinton to get to the bottom of where the failings were and where the shortcomings were. And as President Obama has shown time and time again, he doesn't give up and he doesn't forget. He holds those responsible who must be held responsible. And I have no doubt he will do the same in this case.
Ms. Long?
Senator, just last night at the debate, we heard President Obama saying something that was clearly incorrect. He was saying for days, and Secretary Clinton was saying for days, and Ambassador Susan Rice was saying for days, that this whole thing in Libya was spurred by this amateur video. They did not say that this was a concerted terrorist attack. And indeed, Ambassador Rice went out time after time saying this. And I agree with Congressman Peter King that it's time for Ambassador Rice to resign. And wouldn't you agree that after she went out with this false story that she should resign?
Would you like me to respond?
Please.
Absolutely not. What we know is there's been extraordinary turmoil within the Middle East because of the Arab Spring. We've seen democracy begin to approach Libya. We took out a horrible leader that was responsible for terror attacks on Americans. We lost lives of Syracuse students with the Lockerbie bomber. And so President Obama has been committed to trying to strengthen democracy in the Middle East.
Yes, Senator, I know, but I'm talking about this specific instance. We know that this was an act of terror, and yet this administration went out repeatedly trying to blame it on some amateur video and saying that was a spontaneous protest, and we now know that that wasn't the case. I think we need to get to the bottom of this and find out who knew what when. Wouldn't you agree with me about that?
Absolutely, and so would President Obama. He said it so clearly last night when he said we will get to the bottom. We won't forget. We will hold those who are responsible accountable for that terror attack. He's done it time and time again. He will do it again. And as President Obama said, this is exactly the kind of issue that should not be politicized. It is the kind of issue where we come together and we get to the bottom of it, and we
Senator, he's not holding himself accountable, and he's not holding his own administration accountable.
We do want to move on from this topic, but thank you very much.
We're going to move on to our next question, and this is for you, Ms. Long. Like other leading Republicans, you have criticized the fiscal stimulus, which is the centerpiece of the Obama administration's economic recovery strategy. Do you think the program has been mishandled or wasteful, or do you fundamentally think that government spending can never bring the economy out of recession?
I think that people create jobs, government doesn't create jobs. I think that most of this stimulus was completely wasted. It was filled with millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of corporate cronyism that went to firms like Solyndra. And yes, I think it's fundamentally ill-conceived because the government does not create jobs. There's no free lunch. All that money came from somewhere, and it came out of the pockets of taxpayers or just increased our debt to China. That's basically where that money came from. And as President Obama said, he guesses there weren't quite as many shovel-ready jobs as he thought. I think it was very ill-conceived, and I do not think that that is the way to grow the economy, unlike my opponent.
Senator.
The quickest way to pay down the debt and the deficit is create a growing economy. And that's what we're focused on. We're focused on our small businesses and unleashing their entrepreneurial potential. That means cutting taxes, streamlining their taxes. It means making sure they have the loans they need. It also means rewarding our U.S.-based manufacturers. We do want to see made in America. It means rebuilding our infrastructure. We have crumbling roads, bridges, water systems across our state. We need to make sure that we can focus on rebuilding those and new projects like high-speed rail or rural broadband. But I can tell you, we do have tough choices to make. We can tighten our belts. We can cut spending. But we have to do it precisely and carefully. We cannot have a slash-only approach, as my opponent has. Because when you do that, you are slashing programs that are so vital
well, Senator, what would you
for
cut?
Our economy.
Can you suggest something you'd cut?
For our national security.
Well, you know, she talks about cutting taxes, getting small businesses the loans they need, and getting manufacturing going. She hasn't done any of these things. What we need to get small businesses loans is to get the private sector to make them loans. Her idea of making a loan is taking money from taxpayers and then giving it out to her favored groups. The right way to make a loan is to go to a bank and have it be a legitimate project and have the bank decide, okay, this is worthy, and give you money. And guess what? She's undermined the ability of banks to do that with the Dodd-Frank bill. This is impairing credit. It's impairing the availability of capital for small business.
We're going to move on to that in the near future in just a couple of minutes. But let me move on to another question, and this is for you, Senator Gillibrand. The arrest of a New York City resident today for allegedly attempting to bomb the headquarters of the New York Federal Reserve underscores the need for robust national defense and national security. But we're only weeks away from a budget showdown called the Fiscal Cliff that, among other things, would cut $55 billion a year from defense spending. What steps are you prepared to take to prevent that from happening, if indeed you think that it is something to be avoided?
Well, as you say, Earl, there was a terror attempt in New York City this morning at the Federal Reserve. And I have great gratitude for our FBI and Commissioner Kelly and our police force, because once again, they have thwarted another terror attempt in New York. There have now been 15 terror attempts in New York since 9/11. And so the reason why I disagree with my opponent's slash-only approach is because one of the first things that's going to get cut is terror funding. I worked so hard with Peter King and cross-party lines to make sure we had the funding we needed to make sure a dirty bomb can't come into New York City, to make sure that our synagogues and religious institutions were protected.
We wouldn't cut
that's
that.
Why it's so important.
Ms. Long, let her finish. You'll have a chance to rebut.
And that's why it's so important that when we do cut spending, we do so responsibly, and we look for fat and waste in the programs, and make sure we strengthen programs that protect New Yorkers and protect those who are most at risk. That's why I didn't vote for this budget deal, because I believe that sequestration would be bad for New York. It's going to cut the things we need most: firefighters, police officers, national security, education.
Well, sequestration would be terrible, Senator, but what have you done to try to avoid sequestration? You have to decide what intelligent cuts to make, and as far as I can see, you haven't done anything to advance the ball in that regard. That's the problem. You didn't even vote for the Budget Control Act, which is one of the times when there's been some compromise in the Senate, compromise on Capitol Hill to try to force some discipline. You didn't even vote for that. And as far as defense cuts go, you acted completely surprised when we found that the Sikorsky plant in Big Flats was closing. If I were representing New York, I would get to know all of these defense contractors. I would know what's going on. It wouldn't catch me off guard. With regard to the terror attack today at the Federal Reserve, I think this underscores the importance of making sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. We don't want nuclear weapons in the hands of any state sponsor of terror, because that is going to increase what we already know are not only foreign threats of terrorism, but right here on American soil.
And Ms. Long, if I could just follow you, the pledge that you've taken, the tax pledge to never increase taxes,
yes.
Doesn't that lead to the kind of budget showdown that has brought us to the edge of the fiscal cliff?
No, I fundamentally agree with Ronald Reagan that we don't have debt and deficits because the American people are undertaxed. We have debt and deficits because the federal government spends too much. And the answer to this problem is not to increase taxes. You know, the Tax Foundation just came out with a study last week that showed New York is 50th. We are dead last in the United States in terms of the tax climate. New Yorkers can't afford to pay any more taxes. And it's just not the answer. The more we increase taxes, the more spending just follows. So we need to cut. That is the only way to go about it. I think we need tax reform for sure. The tax system we have now is counterproductive. It's confusing. It takes forever, and the incentives are all in the wrong place. So we need tax reform, but we definitely don't want to increase the overall amount of taxes that we're paying. That's the nature of the pledge that I took.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll change the subject to a social issue at this point. This is for Wendy Long. Ms. Long, you have called Roe versus Wade a, quote, horrible decision. You've also insisted that no one would notice if it were overturned. You've also said that you believe that the issue of abortion rights should be left to the people to decide. And I'd like for you to expound on that, to explain exactly what that means. But also, do you believe that an update is required for New York's laws, which advocates, pro-choice advocates say, are antiquated and potentially even dangerous in the hands of someone who wants to score political points?
Well, Roe v. Wade is universally recognized among most legal scholars to be a bad constitutional decision, just from a legal point of view, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. And the fact is that if it were overturned, every state would get the laws that they want on abortion. New York has always had very pro-abortion laws. So what I meant in that statement was New York can have whatever laws it wants and it wouldn't affect it. Now, pardon me for interrupting, but would you advocate for the overturning of Roe versus Wade? Well, as a United States senator, you don't really advocate. Right. That's what litigants do
right.
in court.
Rather, would you like to see it, if in fact that was something that would become...
Of course, it was a terrible constitutional decision, and what it would do, just to be very clear, what it would do, because there's a lot of confusion on this point, is it would return the decision about abortion policy to each state. So New York might not have the same policy as they would in Iowa. California wouldn't have the same policy that they have in New Jersey. Each state can decide what policy they want. Now, I am pro-life, so there's no doubt about that. I believe that every single human being, from conception until natural death, has a right to life, and that includes the elderly, people who are ill, people who are very, very disabled. I believe in the sanctity of human life. I believe when I see that little picture of my babies on the ultrasound, those are the first pictures in my kid's baby book. That's a human being, and I believe is entitled to respect. But that is a separate question for state legislators. And as I go around this state, I don't hear anybody talking about the abortion issue. My opponent loves to talk about this issue because she's trying to distract attention from her terrible record on jobs in the economy. I don't hear anyone talking about this issue.
Senator?
I disagree with my opponent. I believe every woman has a right to make decisions about her reproductive life, about her family, and when she's going to have a family. I believe that we have to fight for women's rights. This is not a made-up issue. This is an issue that is so important to all Americans. And what's more, it's not an issue that I've raised. It's an issue that was raised by the Republican Congress. Their first bill that they actually introduced in this congressional session was to defund all of Title X, which is the money that's spent for at-risk women, for prenatal care, for pre-cancer screenings. The third bill they introduced would have redefined rape. So this is an issue that was brought to the forefront by the Republican Congress. They wanted bosses to decide whether or not employees should be able to have access to birth control. They had a panel, a hearing on the issue, and the first panel was devoid of a female speaker. Women's voices must be heard in this election, and I urge every woman in this state and across our country to vote.
First of all, I am fully in favor of women's rights. I am a woman. I am completely in favor of women's rights. I've worked all my life, and I believe in women's rights. I also believe in the rights of every other human being. Women's rights can't be at the expense of rights of other human beings. There's something also that you said, Senator, that is completely wrong. Nobody is advocating making decisions about anyone else's contraception. Nobody is suggesting taking anyone's contraception away. The issue here is, will religious employers, religious institutions, or other people of faith, just if I'm not a religious institution, if I'm just a private person with a business, and I have a faith that tells me that abortion, sterilization, and contraception are evil, will I be forced to buy such a plan, to offer it to my employees? People in their private lives can do whatever they want in this regard. This is the question about infringing the most basic religious liberty we have in the Constitution.
Because Errol actually has a question that dovetails into this. So just very, very quickly, Senator. Very quickly.
Fundamentally, if you support the Blunt Amendment, which you have said you do, that amendment would have given any employer the right to deny any kind of coverage that they had religious beliefs that opposed. 98% of America's women use birth control. To say that's evil,
free to use it.
To say that's evil shows a disregard for the ability of a woman to make that personal life and death decision about her own body and her family.
Okay. So you have in the New York State Assembly an assemblyman who's been.
Let's
stick to the. Can we stick to the topic at hand, please?
Believe me, Ms. Long, we're going to give you an opportunity to talk about most, if not all, of the important issues that you want to get to. But I wanted to ask Senator Gillibrand, as we agreed according to our rules. When you talk about the fear, when Democrats talk about the fear that Roe versus Wade might be overturned, doesn't that amount to fear-mongering? And are there any actual cases making their way through the courts that would actually do away with abortion rights?
I do not think it's fear-mongering. This presidential nominee, Mitt Romney, has said that he would get rid of Planned Parenthood. His party has said there should be no exceptions for abortion, no exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest, no exceptions for the life of the mother. That is a serious problem for New Yorkers and for most women that I know. There has been a concerted effort to undermine basic women's reproductive rights. Look, these are fights and battles that my mother had, that my grandmother had. Women of America believe that they should make their own decisions about contraception. They don't expect their legislators to be arguing that their boss should make that decision. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so focused on making sure women are heard in this election. Women have to vote. They have to hold these congressional members accountable. They have to be heard because these are fundamental issues about our rights. And when you talk about the war on women, it's across the board. It's not just health care. It's that Mitt Romney says Governor Walker's his hero who got rid of equal pay for equal work. That's a fundamental economic issue, and it's an issue of fairness.
Senator, I just have to repeat again, you are completely misleading this audience and the people of New York when you say that employers could decide what a woman would do with contraception. It's just completely false. Employers, religious employers, have the right to decide what they will subsidize, what they will offer. No one is telling anyone in their private life, making any decisions for them about contraception. It's just completely false.
Employers do not get to pick and choose which laws they are going to follow. So the Blunt Amendment would have given any employer the right to make a decision
for the first time in American history, we have set up a situation where you have to obey a government dictate or violate your faith. And you know what's going to happen? Then the employer just won't offer any health insurance at all. That's where we're headed.
Look, this is a compromise that was reached in New York State, signed into law by a Republican governor for 10 years. I don't think New Yorkers have believed that their religious liberties have been circumvented. This is a compromise that was reached a decade ago in our state.
Look, folks, let me ask you the original question I wanted to ask actually was about the Supreme Court, and maybe we could make this a very brief exchange, starting with you, Senator Gillibrand. Who is your model Supreme Court justice and why?
I greatly admire Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She's someone who has brought a life of experience to the bench, a breadth of experience that brings diversity and a different perspective. It's an area where my opponent and I disagree vehemently. She was the number one proponent against Sonia Sotomayor's confirmation, and I disagree with that. I think she will make a tremendous justice and will have a long-lasting impact on our bench.
Thank you, Ms. Long.
You know, as I said at the time Sonia Sotomayor was nominated, I would be thrilled if the Supreme Court were filled with 9 Hispanic women. That would be great. My problem with Justice Sotomayor was that she just doesn't follow the Constitution. We need people who will be modest judges, who will just follow the law, who won't make up the law to suit their political purposes and impose it from the bench. That was my problem with Sonia Sotomayor. But I can't believe we are spending this much time talking about these issues when the people of New York are out of work. The unemployment rate here is in the one state in the entire country that has gone up over the last year. And it seems to be all that everybody wants to talk about.
Agreed. We're certainly going to talk about economic issues some more. Your model justice.
Well, I worked for Clarence Thomas, and he's a great man, but I admire many justices. I admire Justice Sam Alito. I admire Justice John Paul Stevens, who I knew when I clerked at the court. And I think Justice John Roberts is a good justice, too. I don't agree with every single decision. You never agree with every single decision that somebody makes. But the question is their approach to the law. Did they seek to faithfully apply the Constitution, or did they seek to impose their own political will from the bench? That's really the test.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a question, again, it deals with a constitutional issue. It deals with the Second Amendment. This is to you, Ms. Long, regarding Second Amendment rights. You've been quite outspoken throughout the campaign about your support of Second Amendment rights. If your chief concern about stronger gun control measures is that you'd want to protect the rights of hunters and sportsmen, I believe, is one of your issues. Explain why a semi-automatic and high magazines of the sort that gun control advocates would seek to limit or ban, both of which are illegal at the moment, why these need to remain legal.
Okay, well, that's not my only concern at all. My concern is to preserve and protect what the Second Amendment says, which is that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we now know, because the Supreme Court has ruled, that that is an individual right, like the other rights in the Bill of Rights. It belongs to us as individuals. So that's what I'm concerned with protecting. It certainly is for sports purposes, but it's also for purposes of self-defense. It's for all sorts of purposes. So that's my concern. What I think is really amazing here is that my opponent, when she represented this area in Congress, had an A rating from the NRA, and she told everybody that she kept her guns under her bed. She now has an F rating from the NRA. It's just incredible to me, and I'd like to know how in the world she could go and do this 180-degree flip from being a strong proponent of the Second Amendment, being someone who was given an A by the NRA, to someone who has an F. And by the way, the most basic NRA course, when my kids get their guns, the NRA tells you where you store your guns, and a very bad idea is to keep them under the bed.
Senator.
I know.
Respond?
To respond to her or to your question?
Both.
Okay.
If you wish.
Okay. I support the Second Amendment and the right of gun owners to engage in hunting and sport. But we have serious issues across New York. We have issues of gang violence. We have issues of gun violence. I can't tell you how disturbing it is to sit with a mother who's lost her child to random gun violence. It's inexcusable. And so what I have to do as the senator from New York is make sure that I can protect our families. And that means common sense reforms that can keep guns out of the hands of criminals. One of the biggest challenges we have in New York State is 90% of our weapons come from out of state, and 90% are used by criminals. And so what we have to do is keep those guns out of the hands of those criminals. And that's why I've written a piece of legislation that would lock down on the gun traffickers, make sure our law enforcement have the tools they need to trace them and to find them. And that's one of the ways we can keep our community safe.
What she's overlooking is that the root cause of crime is criminals. You don't solve this problem by hindering the rights of law-abiding citizens. The way to stop gun violence is to apprehend criminals. And guess what? Criminals don't care what the laws are. They're going to find ways to get guns and commit violence anyway. So all of these restrictions on the basic Second Amendment right of law-abiding citizens who have firearms really are not the answer.
Just to be clear, Senator, regarding the change in the NRA rating, and your voting record is what that was based off of. Did you change your ideology from between the time that you were a congresswoman representing this area and then subsequently and then became a senator, or did you do that for some other reason?
My values have never changed, and I support the Second Amendment. What's different, though, is that we have gun crime issues across the state that weren't as prevalent in my old district. And when I met with a family on Long Island that lost their daughter, and when I met with a family in Buffalo that has experienced enormous amounts of gun violence and gun crime and gang violence, I have to be able to protect those families. And that means I've been outspoken on common sense legislation that could be bipartisan, that's not about lawful gun owners. It's about the criminals and giving our law enforcement the tools they need to find them and to be able to make sure they are not bringing in guns from out of state into our state.
Okay.
What's up?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. It's time now for our lightning round. We're going to ask questions that can only be answered with the words yes or no by the candidates. We're going to ask both candidates to refrain from explanations or maybes or anything except a yes or no. And we'll start with you, Senator Gillibrand. Should New York reinstitute the death penalty?
No, not at present.
Ms. Long.
Yes.
Senator, do you read books on your computer or iPad?
No.
No. Wendy Long.
No.
Senator, should public money be used to fund PBS?
Yes.
Wendy Long.
sadly, I love PBS, but not a good use of public money. I think it could survive otherwise.
Senator, do you write your own tweets?
Yeah, I approve my own tweets. I don't type them.
Wendy.
Same here.
Okay. And Senator, have you ever taken part in a political protest?
Yes.
Ms. Long.
Yes. And I do write a lot of my own tweets. I just want to amend that last sentence.
You can amend that?
I approve them and I write most of them.
Okay. Senator, should cities and towns publicize the names of people arrested for patronizing a prostitute?
No.
Ms. Long.
Yes.
And Senator, have you ever been arrested?
No.
Ms. Long.
No.
Okay. Senator, would you like sorry, we're going to be starting with you, Ms. Long. Forgive me. Would you like to be, if elected, Senate Majority Leader?
Would I like to be Senate Majority Leader? Sure.
Senator?
Yes.
Ms. Long, have you fired a gun or rifle within the last year?
Yes.
Senator?
No.
Ms. Long, is Andrew Cuomo the best New York governor in your lifetime?
No.
Senator?
I'm going to say his term's not finished, but his father was.
Okay. There we go. Ms. Long, have you read 50 Shades of Grey?
No.
Senator?
No.
Me neither, for the record. Okay. Ms. Long,
No comment. No comment.
should there be a national ban on large sugary drinks?
No.
No.
Ms. Long, do you regularly read political blogs?
Yes.
Senator?
Yours.
Yes or no? Ms. Long, have you purchased a lottery ticket within the last year?
Yes.
No.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, that concludes our lightning round. Now it is time for something a little bit more intense. We call this the cross-examination. That is when each candidate gets to ask her opponent a question. Responses will be 60 seconds long. Senator Gillibrand, you will begin. Your question for Ms. Long.
As we look to Congress, we know that it's broken. And if you are elected senator, and if we are able to reach a bipartisan deal to do the hard work of cutting spending and reducing our debt and deficit by $4 trillion over 10 years, will you break your pledge to Grover Norquist if there is a deal that has $10 of cuts for every $1 revenues raised?
I think it's a little bit of a false question because I think that we could raise revenues in such a deal while amending the tax code. In other words, it's not more revenues that I'm opposed to. It's higher tax rates. And indeed, what we really need is an economy that's going to be growing. I mean, Ronald Reagan proved this. You can cut tax rates tremendously, and you can reduce loopholes. And when you have a pro-growth tax code, you can actually end up taking in more revenue for the government. And so I think that we certainly should reform the tax code. I think it needs a thorough overhaul. And I think that if we do that, and we have a pro-growth tax code, we'll see the economy grow, we'll see jobs created, and that will help us close our debt and deficits. But I certainly think the great idea is all those spending cuts you referenced. That's a fantastic idea, and that's really the main way we need to attack debt and deficits.
Thank you. And Ms. Long, now you can ask Senator Gillibrand a question.
Right. Well, my question really, Senator, is about, you have been a foremost advocate for women's rights. You've been a foremost advocate for transparency and accountability in government. I see this crisis here in New York State, centered in our New York Assembly, where we have an assemblyman who was sexually harassing young women in his office. Fairly disgusting, fairly ridiculous, and this is a repeated pattern in this sort of culture of corruption in Albany. The difference in this latest case that came to light a couple months ago was that Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, instead of addressing the matter, instead of bringing it to light and trying to remedy, instead took over $100,000 in taxpayer money and used it as hush money to try to keep these young women quiet. To my way of thinking, this is a big scandal, not only in terms of how it affects young women who, as you know, with your whole effort off the sidelines to encourage women to get involved in government, these young women were probably very idealistic. Here they were working in the New York State Assembly and being treated this way by a man in power. But what I find even more outrageous was the actions of the Assembly Speaker in covering it up and using taxpayer dollars to do so. My question for you is, why will you not call for his resignation? And in fact, would you join me tonight? I think it would be a great place to do it if we could call for his resignation together.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the allegations against Vito Lopez for sexually harassing his employees is outrageous, disgraceful. There is no place in this state or in this country for a boss to sexually harass his employee, and certainly no place for it in state government. Speaker Silver has asked for a full investigation as to the nature of the confidential settlement and why it was permitted to be a confidential settlement. When we have the facts from that investigation, we will know whether or not that was done improperly. My view is Vito Lopez should have paid those fines himself. Taxpayer money should not have been used. But we do have to hold people accountable. And that's why the investigation is so important. And it's why Speaker Silver, he was wrong to not have it been public.
But wasn't he wrong to use taxpayer money to try to cover it up? I mean, we know that was wrong.
We will get to the bottom of it because that's the purpose of the investigation. And if there was any wrongdoing, then we will know those facts and we can...
But he paid $100,000 in hush money to try to silence these young women. Don't you agree with me that was wrong?
I think we wanted one question and we got an answer. We're going to move on to some of our questions, and this one is for Senator Gillibrand. Senator, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, calls for over $700 billion in reduced payments to insurance companies and or health care providers. Republicans are calling this a hit on Medicare. Do you think that the reduction is justified, and what would you tell senior citizens about that reduction?
I would assure senior citizens, not by my own words, but by those of AARP, that those were reforms that actually strengthened Medicare and Medicaid, actually taking some of the fat out of the system. It wasn't for our seniors. The money was going to insurance companies. So it was a way to streamline Medicare and Medicaid to make sure it will be there for our seniors and for the next generation of seniors. And when we're talking about cutting spending, these are the kinds of reforms that matter. They can strengthen our entitlements, strengthen those safety nets, at the same time getting rid of fraud, waste, or abuse.
Ms. Long.
I'm sorry, but I have to use my time to return to the thing I was just addressing, which is Senator Gillibrand, you stood here in this almost exact spot about 6 years ago, and you said of Speaker Dennis Hastert that there were facts on the table that indicated to you that he should resign in an analogous situation. And he hadn't even used taxpayer dollars to cover up the harassment that was going on there. How in the world can you distinguish when you were calling for the Speaker of the House to resign and not calling for Speaker Silver to resign?
The facts of the two cases are entirely different. There's an ongoing investigation right now in the state of New York to get to the bottom of it. And with Speaker Hastert, it was a bipartisan call for him to resign for what he was covering up with regard to a congressman.
But there was an investigation going on with Speaker Hastert.
Ms. Long, I think we're going to move on. And we're going to move on to a new question at this point. And it is from me to you. At this point, we all know that there's a very hotly contested presidential race. I think we saw that much last night. The polls are very tight. We really don't know at this point who will win. So it's anyone's guess. If, in fact, President Obama is reelected and you are also successful on Election Day, you will have to work with the president of the opposing party. So in the spirit of bipartisanship, could you please name one area where you agree with the president and you believe you could work with him to benefit New Yorkers?
Well, first of all, I think that President Obama has been the one who hasn't been willing to come halfway and work with people in the Senate. He sends a budget that he knows that no one will vote for. Even my opponent didn't vote for. So that's really the problem here. We're not seeing compromise from his side on the White House.
But you hit the reset button, essentially, assumedly, with this election. He would return. He would be a lame duck president. You would be, we don't know who will control the Senate even at this point, but assumedly you will be a senator. He will be a president. What could you work with him on
if he's interested in reducing our $16 trillion debt, as he says he is, if he's interested in reducing our budget deficits, I absolutely would work with him on that, and I'd be willing to cut in any and all areas of the federal budget.
But not if it comes to raising taxes, just to reiterate.
Well, I'm talking about cutting spending right now.
Okay. So, Senator Gillibrand, to you, if in fact Mitt Romney is elected, of course he would be a Republican, you a Democrat. What is an area that you have of agreement with Mitt Romney?
Well, I appreciated the fact that as governor, he fought for health care for all residents of Massachusetts.
We did get that done, though. It is, and according to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's actually constitutional. So something else that you think you might be able to work with him on to benefit New York?
What I found in my time in the Senate is that there are core common values that we can come together around. When I focused our efforts on trying to pass the 9/11 health bill, I reached across party lines, reached across the aisles to make sure that we could come together to help our heroes and to protect them for the health care they desperately needed. We did the same thing when we were trying to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and we were able to repeal that corrosive, negative policy that undermined our military readiness, because I could find common ground with those senators. So I would look towards President Romney with where we could agree. I suspect we could agree on some national security issues. National security tends to be the issue where they aren't as partisan. Democrats, Republicans want to make sure, for example, that Iran not obtain nuclear weapons. We want to make sure we have Middle East peace. Those are areas where I assume I could get along with Mitt Romney and anyone. You could find those common values.
Actually, this question, and this is to you, segues into your answer. There are some Jewish voters who remain pretty unconvinced that the current president's support of Israel is sufficiently strong, particularly when it comes to Iran and its nuclear programs. They were dismayed when, during a recent trip to New York for the UN General Assembly, that the president did not make time to meet with Israeli President Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So what, at this point, if anything, should the president, the current one, be doing to Israel?
I know that President Obama, in words and deeds, is an ally of Israel and is hand in glove with Israel. We have worked side by side to make sure that Iran never obtains nuclear weapons and does not militarize their nuclear capability. President Obama has said time and time again, containment is not an option. All options are on the table. I take him at his word. President Obama and the Prime Minister of Israel have a very strong relationship. They talk all the time. Whether or not they make a meeting on a given day isn't the measure of their relationship. What it is that we are collectively working on sanctions to make sure we put enormous political pressure on that country so that we can convince the Iranian people to rise up against their leadership, or to convince Ahmadinejad that he has to join the World Economic Community and stop pursuing nuclear weapons. I have no doubt in my mind that President Obama is 100% allied with Israel on Israel's security and our own.
I agree with Assemblyman Dov Hikian, who said after the recent visit of the president to New York City, when he refused to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that this administration's policy with regard to Israel is absolutely incomprehensible. Our relationship with Israel is at an all-time low, and President Obama is responsible for that. And I think as a senator from New York, if I'm the senator from New York, I will hold the president's feet to the fire, as my opponent has not. I think a senator from New York should stand up and be an advocate for Israel, be pressing the president. We have not done what Israel wants us to do. It's very clear from the statements of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Iran is moving and marching toward nuclear capability. And I actually agree with Secretary Hillary Clinton when she was running in 2008. She said, we have to make sure that the military option is very clearly on the table. We have to make absolutely clear to Iran that they know that if they launch a nuclear attack, they will meet with a reprisal from us. That's what she said, and I think that's what we have to make clear. This president absolutely has not done that. He's still negotiating and talking to the mullahs in Iran, and it is not working. They are marching very, very close to that red line that Prime Minister Netanyahu was referring to.
Senator, do you want 30 seconds to rebut that?
I disagree with her characterization of our president and his commitment to Israel. We are hand in glove with Israel, and President Obama will make sure that America is safe. There's no doubt that this president has shown his commitment to national security. When he came into office, we were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was nowhere to be found. He's been able to take down Osama bin Laden. We are out of Iraq, and he's focused on making sure our country's safe, and we will continue to work hand in glove with Israel to make sure Iran never obtains nuclear weapons.
But see, this is the problem, that this administration acts like, of course it's wonderful to kill Osama bin Laden, but we can't just rest on our laurels and take victory laps about that. The head of Islamic terrorism is rearing its very ugly head, as we see throughout the Middle East. We saw this attempted attack today at the Federal Reserve. It is still a very dangerous world. Radical Islamic terrorists still want to kill us, and this is not the right direction to be going in. Leading from behind, letting this situation get out of control, and letting Iran continue to march toward nuclear capability, because then they will not only be able to attack themselves, but they will be able to arm terrorists.
I have a related question for you, Ms. Long, involving Afghanistan. Do you think that U.S. involvement in Afghanistan was a mistake, and should the administration have set a public deadline for withdrawal?
It was not a mistake. We went into Afghanistan for a very good reason, to try to go after the terrorists who had caused the 9/11 attacks on America in New York City. And our goal is victory. We need to disable Al-Qaeda. That is our goal. What bothers me is that when the president initiated this surge, he did so with the timetable for withdrawal. To me, that undermined the entire purpose, and it seems to me that his timetable has been politically driven and not driven by military reality, not driven by national security and the need to defend our country. So I think that the whole timetable and process of withdrawal has disregarded the recommendations of General Petraeus, and I think it's very ill-considered conceived, and it's pretty transparently for political purposes and not for the purposes of winning victory over Al-Qaeda or of protecting the United States.
Senator.
I believe we should be out of Afghanistan now, and there's a number of reasons for that. 10 years ago, we were attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda. They created a base of operations and a training ground in Afghanistan. And that's why it was important to be able to take out Al-Qaeda and their training operations in Afghanistan and to take out Osama bin Laden. We've done that. But Al-Qaeda in these last 10 years has metastasized. It is now an international, remotely operated organization. Our last few terror attacks from Al-Qaeda have come from places like Pakistan or Somalia or Yemen, not from Afghanistan. Today, very little of Al-Qaeda is left in Afghanistan. And we have a partner in Karzai who is not only an unwilling partner, but one who does not respect the men and women's lives who have been given for the cause of stability in his country. There is rife corruption throughout his government, rife corruption throughout contractors. So I do not believe that we should continue our investment of troops' lives, and our money in Afghanistan because the threat has moved. We are much more a threat because of Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, much more so. We have threats in Pakistan. So we should have a counter-terrorism approach as opposed to a counterinsurgency approach. Counterinsurgency is what we have in Afghanistan. It's broad-based. It's about stabilizing governments. We need narrow, targeted missions against terrorism, and that's a counterterrorism approach that I think would be preferable.
Did you want to?
I certainly agree about Al-Qaeda metastasizing. I agree that we can't just limit our concern to Afghanistan. I was on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border in the late 1980s. I saw some of these people. We thought they were our friends then, when they were the freedom fighters and they were fighting the Soviet Union. I think it's very difficult sometimes to know who your allies are, who you can trust, who's going to turn against you. But my answer was addressing itself, Errol, to your question about the timetable for withdrawal. I think there certainly may be a limited role to continue to play, not only in Afghanistan. We have to be more nimble. I agree with the Senator that there are other places where we need to combat terrorism.
Thank you.
Senator, this question is to you. We're going back to the economy, specifically upstate. Senator Hillary Clinton, who held this seat before you, as you have mentioned, infamously pledged when she was first running that she would bring 200,000 jobs to upstate. New York, actually, the region lost close to 50,000 jobs while she was in during the 8 years she was in office. Specifically, what have you done to reinvigorate the upstate economy? And going forward, if you are in fact reelected, what would you support? And specifically, also, do you believe fracking should be part of that mix?
All in 1 minute.
Yes.
Okay.
Go.
I'm from upstate New York, so I understand our unique challenges, but I also understand our unique opportunities. And what we have going for us here in upstate New York is an incredible university system with our private and public colleges. We have the best workforce in the world, and we have a great manufacturing tradition. And so where our opportunities lie is in advanced manufacturing, because that doesn't get outsourced. That's where our workers make the difference. We have the Nano College right here in Albany. We have biotechnology. We have energy technology. We have optics technology and high tech all across our state. That is why funding for our research and development is so important. That's why I've prioritized making sure the research and development tax credit can actually be made permanent. It's why we have to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of our engineers, of our inventors, because that's how businesses get created. That's what the opportunity is. So those are the issues that I've fought for. We need to see Made in America, and we need to see it right here in upstate New York. We have the tools, we have what it takes, and that's how we're going to turn our economy around.
And so just to follow on that, you believe the future then is in what might be called clean tech, which is some of what you're focused on there. Just there is obviously still manufacturing that is not clean tech, and also a proposal on the table to do drilling. Is that something that you might support?
With regard to clean tech, we have so much unlimited opportunity in biofuels, in fuel cell, in wind and solar, and we produce those technologies and those products right here in New York. So we want to make a long-term investment there. With regard to hydrofracking, it's a significant economic opportunity and a potentially clean source of energy. But what we need to make sure before we start hydrofracking is to understand the facts. There's three things I would need to know before I would be encouraging it in New York State. Number one, we need to know what are the chemicals, concentration, and formulas that are used in hydrofracking, and have there been any studies about the health effects of those formulas and chemicals. Number two, when you drill down deeply, there are naturally occurring elements, including radium. So when you bring that water back up, it can be radioactive. So you need to have in place an agreement about how you will clean and treat that water. And third, after the drilling's all done, you have wells that can deteriorate over time. We have to require that our gas companies will have a commitment to doing the cleanup so we don't have more Superfund sites in our state. One of the many things we have going for us in New York State is we have clean drinking water, and two industries rely on it: agriculture and tourism. So we have to make sure that we can protect that drinking water. So I'd want to get to the bottom of those questions before we proceed.
Okay.
Well, two things. First of all, the initial question here was, what have you done, Senator Gillibrand, to bring jobs back to upstate? And the answer really is nothing. I mean, as I go around upstate, I see towns with empty storefronts, factories that have been shuttered, paint peeling off of buildings, and people desperate for work and desperate for jobs. And your only answer to this is to introduce these things called jobs bills. And it's a nice title, but what they really are is just taking money out of the pocket of some taxpayers and handing it out to other taxpayers who are favored by you. Jobs are created by people. Jobs are created by the private sector. And what we need to do to get jobs going is to cut taxes and cut regulation and absolutely get going with hydrofracking for natural gas. And all these concerns that you cite are just phony concerns. This thing has been studied. It has been completely studied. And not only that, never mind, we have it happening. It's been happening for decades in Ohio. In West Virginia, it's called the gold rush of West Virginia. The economies in these areas are booming. And guess what? There's been no evidence anywhere that this is polluting any drinking water. These are completely phony concerns, and the people of upstate need to get going with hydrofracking. It could spur what you talked about, which isn't happening, which is a manufacturing renaissance in this state. The price of energy could come down so much that we could get manufacturing actually going again. What we have right now is, as you go around the state, you just hear about plant closings, people being laid off. We hear about layoffs at Welch Allen, which is another subject, which is because of the medical device manufacturing tax and Obamacare, which you have advocated. This is costing jobs.
That could have been in the
there was a lot
reform.
to unpack there.
Was a lot to unpack.
Can I just respond to the first issue, the hydrofracking issue? My concern is very simple. Wendy, you told the Times Union reporter that you believe that the economic benefits outweigh any health risks that could be caused by methane in drinking water.
No, they don't outweigh them. There aren't any health risks.
Okay. To the extent they are, you said that to the extent there are any health effects, that the economic opportunities outweigh those health effects of methane in drinking water. And the concern I have is this. How do you talk to a mother in our state who asks you, well, how much methane is too much in my drinking water? How much methane can my children be exposed to? Those are not questions a mom should have to ask. So all I'm saying is, yes, it is an economic opportunity, but before we destroy our clean drinking water that powers two major industries, we should make sure we have all the facts. We have a right to know those facts. And my question to you is simply, why wouldn't you want to know the facts? We have a bill in Congress to get to the bottom of what are the chemicals, and they should be disclosed. Why wouldn't you want to know the facts?
They're going to be disclosed. And this whole thing about methane is completely ridiculous. Methane has been naturally occurring, coming up through the water for centuries. There have been little historical markers in New York mentioning where this was happening in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s. This little movie where you light a match up to the faucet and it burns. This is naturally occurring gas. It has absolutely nothing to do with fracking. It's a complete myth.
I will try and sneak in one more question. We may cut you off a little abruptly because we want to make sure you get your closing statements. But this is to you, Ms. Long. You oppose the DREAM Act. Imagine yourself talking to one of the thousands of young people in New York who, through no fault of their own, was raised here as a productive and law-abiding student or young adult. How would you explain to them why the country is better off if they were deported?
Well, I don't think they necessarily should be deported. I think with immigration, we desperately need immigration reform. We need it to be done properly by Congress, not by an unlawful, unconstitutional act of the president acting without Congress. So the first thing is we need to secure our borders, and there's no better evidence of that than the attempted terrorist attack today. We need to know who's coming in and who's coming out. Now, once we've secured our border, we absolutely should proceed, Errol, to immigration reform. And that means completely reforming our immigration laws and coming up with an orderly process to address the people just like the one that you're talking about. If people have committed if people are here illegally and they've committed crimes, we need to get them repatriated as soon as possible. If they are here and they don't have any family connections, that's another story. If they're brought here as a young person, I think it's absolutely correct to establish a path whereby through military service they could gain a path to legality.
Let me give Senator Gillibrand just 20 seconds.
I believe in comprehensive immigration reform. Part of the richness of our culture, of our society of New York, is because of our immigrant heritage. So we need to make sure we have common sense reforms that allow families to be reunified, to make sure a child who comes to this country through no fault of their own can have that opportunity for a college education or to serve in our military and have that pathway to citizenship. I think this is the kind of bill we could have common sense, positive progress on in this next Congress.
Senator, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm very sorry. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We've covered a lot of ground, both of you, and unfortunately, it's all the time we have for our questions. It is now time for our closing remarks by the candidates. So you will have 60 seconds for both of these. And Senator, we're going to begin with you.
Well, thank you, Liz. I want to thank YNN and New York One and Skidmore for hosting this debate. I want to thank Wendy Long for joining me in this debate. For my short time in the U.S. Senate, it has been a privilege and an honor to represent you. I hope that I will be blessed to have a chance to continue doing that and to continue to fight for our middle-class families. Let's be clear, there's a lot at stake in this election, and there's a real choice between whether we are going to continue to move forward or whether we will go backwards. But I know New York can lead the way in economic recovery. And to do that, we just need to focus on our strengths. Our world-class universities and educational institutions, our commitment to advanced manufacturing, our great workers who can compete with anyone in the world if given a level playing field. I know that we can come together in this election and get things done. I know we can do that because in the Senate, I've done it.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Long.
I've been going around this state talking to people who agree with me that this November 6th is not just an election, it's an emergency. Sitting around their kitchen tables all around the state, I think New Yorkers want some pretty common sense reforms. They know that we're broke and they want us to stop spending money that we don't have. They want better education for their children. They want us to reform taxes and get affordable health care. And they want us to cut the red tape that is strangling small business. As I go around the state, I hear people say, we don't trust the Democrats. And then they also say, we don't trust the Republicans either. And that's the voice of common sense. Professional politicians' parties have gotten us into this. But I believe that the greatness of America and prosperity for New York is within our reach. I think we just have to pull together and do it. And I would be privileged to represent you and the state of New York and America. And I ask for your vote on November 6th. And go Yankees and CC Sabathia.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Long, Senator. That concludes tonight's debate. It was very lively, very interesting. We'd like to thank both of you for participating.
And of course, we'd also like to thank Skidmore College for allowing us the use of this theater. We thank our audience. They've been great. Thank you, and good night from Saratoga Springs. Remember that Election Day is November 6th.